Welcome to this segment of Take 10 for Torah, where we set aside 10 minutes of our daily lives in order to learn Torah. This week we're going to be looking at something very interesting. It's a topic that not many are familiar with, but many see happening on a weekly basis on Shabbat, and might not have taken so much notice of by going through the Siddur, but something that after having gone through this sugya, after gone through this topic, well, a lot of things will fit into place and make a lot of sense in terms of our Shabbat tefillot and in terms of our Shabbat Birchat HaMazon and other areas. I hope you've clicked on the source sheet. We're going to be looking at the source sheet and looking number one. The first source is an interesting source. The response of the Rambam, while they're quoted by many of the super commentaries of the Rambam on the Mishnah Torah, it's rare that we actually study the response of the Rambam, the Shalos HaTshuvos of the Rambam. And truth be told, a lot of the response of the Rambam are in doubt as to whether or not he actually wrote them. Whether or not he wrote them or not, this one response has become the basis of normative halacha, and it's actually a very interesting question that the Rambam was asked, and his answer and his explanation are even more apropos. The Rambam was asked as follows: Sheila Shelos B'nei Chalav La Rambam. B'nei Chalav, the famous town in Syria, where most of the Syrian Jews that we know, the Halabim, are from, and the Chachamim at the time of the Rambam from the Halabi community asked the Rambam as follows: Sheila Rishona Ma Yomar Adonenu B'davar Amiras HaTfilah Tana Shechaver Rabbeinu Sajagon. Zav v'kasav also l'shabbos ha'moadim v'yimei simcha. Hayim roi l'tzibor l'omra b'shabbos ha'moadim, o gam ken haroi shlo l'omra kol yikar b'shabbos ha'moadim b'shel ha'bakashos v'atchino shabbat. The question they asked, evidently, I'm not familiar with the actual tefillah, but Rav Sajagon, one of the great Gaonim, had written a tefillah prayer, and the community Chalab wanted to know whether or not they should recite this prayer on Shabbat U'Moadim. And the reason why they were concerned was because it had bakashot, it had requests, and it had tchinot, more supplications that were included in this prayer that they felt were improper to say and not proper to say on Shabbat. And the question was, what was the basis of their concern? What was it that they were so concerned about? And when we look at what the halacha actually understands as bakashot and tchinot, these supplications and requests, we need to look at a different area of halacha. This is going to be source number 2. This is the Rambam in Hilchos Tanis, the laws of fast. The Rambam starts off, he says as follows: Mitzvos aseh min haTorah lizok ol ariya b'chatzrosos hakol tzara shelo tavo al hatzibor. Shemar tzar tzorereschem v'roschem b'chatzrosos. Klomar kol davar sheyatzer lachem kol batzuros v'dever v'arba chayotzohem zaku aleim v'hariu. The Rambam states that whenever a trouble befalls our nation, a tragedy, whether it be plague, whether it be famine, whether it be war, we have a command to call out to God. This, the Rambam will further on explain, is not the common mitzvah of tefillah that we're familiar with, but rather calling out to God from trouble. And the Rambam explains in source number 4, Asur lisanos lizokos chanin levakesh rachmin b'Shabbos v'afil b'tzara min hatzara shetzibur misanin masrin alehem ein misayin v'lo masrin b'Shabbos. Right? We skipped one, but we'll go back to it in a minute. The Rambam says that all of these tsaras, all of these troubles, and all of these fasts that we would normally fast for, we're not allowed to fast, nor are we allowed to call out to God for these problems on Shabbat. Right? On Shabbos, that's out of the picture. We're not allowed to. Also on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to. Right? All of these things you're not allowed to call out to God, meaning that there is an actual prohibition of certain forms of prayer on Shabbat. And this, again, is the basis of the question of the Chalabim. The Chalabim knew that there were certain things that were completely forbidden on Shabbat to ask for, right? And because they understood that these were forbidden to ask for on Shabbat, they looked at this tefillah Tana of Sajagon, and said, a lot of the things that we're not normally allowed to ask for Shabbat are encompassed and enclosed inside this prayer. And therefore, should we say this prayer on Shabbat? Now the Rambam goes on and explains that we don't have that number 5, and goes in Tanis al Tzibur lo Shabbosos lo Yom Tovim, on Yom Tov and Shabbos we don't fast. V'chein ein token b'hem v'lo b'shofar b'chatzrosos v'lo zakim eschanim b'hem mitzvila. We don't call out, like we said, in prayer for these types of tragedies. El in kein haisa ir shekifu ha'goyim o nahar o sfina mitrefes bayam. Unless the tragedy or the tsar, the pain is so great that we are forced, that there's nothing else we can do, we have to daven for it, and that, or the enemy is surrounding us, a river is about to overflow its banks and flood the city. Right? Even a Jew, and as an individual, is facing a personal tragedy, he's allowed to call out. But we don't blow shofar unless it's to call everybody out to defend themselves in war. In other words, if the emergency or the tragedy is severe enough, then you would be allowed to. And our question is as follows: what is it about these requests, these supplications, that we're not allowed to ask for on Shabbat? What's the reason behind this prohibition? And the answer is a beautiful one. Look at number 7, the Rambam in his tshuva, the answer to this question to the Halabim. HaTshuva ela atfilah shechiber romos hagonzal ve'ela atchinos kulam v'abakashos v'atfilos ha'mersamos mechiber gaonim v'apiyutanim aser lomar lahem behem mihem mishum panim. Right, the Rambam says that these tefillos that the Gaonim in all their wisdom wrote were not written for Shabbat, and they're forbidden to be said on Shabbat. The rest of the week you're allowed to, but on Shabbat and Yom Tovim you are not allowed to recite these prayers. Our Chachamim were very careful to ensure that we did not say any of these tefillos on Shabbat. V'amar Shabbos him l'lizrak, or refuah krova lavo. Right, even when we say the Mishaberach on Shabbat, or we wish somebody that they should feel well, we say that Shabbos is not a day that we call out. It's so part. If you notice on Shabbat, the rabbi, when he makes his Mishaberach, or the gabbai, when he makes the Mishaberach, will say this line, will end off with a statement: Shabbos himiluzak. Shabbos is not a day to call out. We're confident that the refuah will come, as opposed to the other days of the week when we say Mishaberach, or we see somebody and we're mavaker chola, we visit them when they're sick. We say you should have a refuah shlema as a way of requesting. We're davening to Hashem when we say that. Here we are not. Says the Rambam, that is why we left out the middle brachos of Shmon Esrei and Shabbat. The Shmon Esrei and Shabbat is only 7 brachos long. The middle 13 brachos of the Shmon Esrei, which are requests, are left out, they're set aside, and 1 bracha is put in. Those 13 requests are set aside, and a bracha of praise, whether it discusses Shabbat or HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is substituted in its place. Liyosen kulam bakasha v'zeh davar shol ya'ale mi'ish mitamid chachamim im yaru alav lo yachishenu ela misnagi ledvarim hanirin layin. V'komosh atfilah hi avoda nechbada v'od kach kiyum mitzvasa yisal achabed yomim shechvodam. Now, what's the reasoning? The Rambam says the idea is that we have a mitzvah to be mechabed, to honor, to respect, to set Shabbos and Yom Tov aside as a special day. That is our responsibility. That's why we wear nice clothing. That's why we have good food. Shahayu noagin kafi shekava, havoda hayota nechbada. Right? And even the avoda, the way we approach God in our prayer, in our mitzvah performance, in our meals, all the ways that are part of our avodas Hashem, the normal service of the day, that too must reflect the amount of respect and the honor that we give to the day. And therefore, how do we do that? Right? Therefore, we have to set these days aside as days of happiness and days of rest. Right? That's the nature on Yom Tov of Simcha and Shabbos of Menucha, of days of rest. Lola sosam, says the Rambam, Yom Tzom Bechi V'Tzaka. We can't make them days of tragedy, days of emergency. When I enter into Shabbat, I have to assume that everything is okay, everything is doing well, and that's how I show honor to the Shabbat. That it's not a day where I sit worrying about what's happening in my life. It's a day that I set those worries aside and I'm able to focus on the nature of the day, on Shabbat, on the Menucha, on the idea of reestablishing my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that weekly sabbatical, and on Yom Tov, where I'm able to delve into the simcha of the day, of the happiness of the day, and not my worries and my concerns. And saying these prayers would then bring on something contrary to the nature of the day, because the prayers focus in on my worries. And therefore, that's the reason on Shabbos our Shmon Esrei is different. So, to some, even our Birkat HaMazon, certain things are left out at the end of Birkat HaMazon where we have requests. All of those are left out and changed in order that the nature of Shabbat flows through not only in our dress, not only in our behavior, but even in our prayer. The nature of Shabbat runs through. That's the idea of this week's Take 10 for Torah. I hope you understood it. Review it if you didn't catch it the first time. It's well worth it. Really sets your Shabbat on a different tone. Check out our other features at bethjacob.org, especially in the Torah section, and even the Dvar Torah on the Sedra, the Sedra of the week. You'll enjoy it. Shalom.